Okay, so hello everyone again. This is Gunjan and I work as a registered migration agent with Aussizz Group. Now, this session, I'm going to share my screen. This is going to be a 1 hour presentation on parent visas and the long-term stay tourist, the sponsored family age 70 visa subclass as well. You will have an opportunity to ask questions in the end, or feel free to ask questions in the middle of the presentation as well, but I'll try to take questions at the end of my presentation. Right. Okay. Okay, great. So this is about the parent visas and the long-term tourist visa for parents. And I'm going to be talking about now different categories of parent visas. So there are 6 classes of parent visas altogether, which are divided into contributory and non-contributory parent visas. Now, my slides are going to be very, very clear about the differences of the different parent visas, different fees and charges that you are charged for the different parent visa subclasses. And my presentation is going to be based on the lot of common questions and confusion that the people have regarding the bridging visa, what kind of bridging visa you get, on which parent visa you get the bridging visa. So feel free to share the links to your friends and families as well, so they can get the knowledge as well. Now, when we talk about parent visas, the word itself says it's for your parents, and the different categories suggest that these are the ones that I've highlighted in red are the contributory ones. So it's clear. So the first one we'll be talking about the 173 parent visa, which is a contributory parent visa. The second subclass is the 143, which is also a contributory parent visa. The difference is the 173 is a temporary visa and the 143 is a permanent visa. I'm going to be talking about how do we lodge this visa and what kind of documents you need and the fees and charges in my later slides, so stay tuned. The 103 parent visa is a permanent visa. The 884, 864 and the 804. Just give me one moment, guys. Yeah. Sorry, everyone. There was some issue with the sharing of the slides. Now I hope everybody can see my presentation. Okay. So, okay, I'll start again. So parent visas, long-term tourist visa for parents. I'm going to be talking about the different categories of parent visas. So the 173 parent visa is the contributory temporary visa. The 143 is a permanent visa for parents, which is also a contributory. I will be discussing why is it called a contributory parent visa in my latest slides as well. The 103 is a parent permanent visa. It's a permanent visa you can lodge straight away for your parents. The 884 is the aged contributory parent visa. 864 is also an aged parent visa. I'll be talking about why do they call this a contributory parent visa and why do they call this an aged parent visa at the same time. The difference between these visas is one is a temporary visa and one is a permanent visa. At the same time, why we talk about the contributory parent visa for aged parent visas, we also have the 804, which is the aged parent permanent visa. There's pretty easy contributory and non-contributory aged parent and the normal parent visas. I've made this matrix so it's easier to understand, because one of the most common questions that I get about the parent visa is which are contributory and which are non-contributory. Why they call contributory is because of the fees amount. So basically, when we talk about contributory, I've been asked a lot of questions that why this visa is called a contributory one. We will talk about that in my latest slides as well. It's because of basically the way you are paying the fees. Because of the fee structure, they call this a contributory parent visa. So contributory is divided into aged and not aged parent visa. In the aged category, you have the 864, which is the parent visa, and the 884, which is the temporary visa. In the aged one, also you get 864, which is the contributory aged parent visa. The ones they are not aged, which means that it doesn't matter how old are your parents, you get to lodge the contributory parent visa, which is the 143, 173, and the contributory parent visa, which is the 143 as well. The non-contributory ones, as you can see in my matrix, there are 2 categories in the non-contributory as well. One is the aged one and one is which is not aged. So the aged parent visa is subclass 804, and the normal, not the one which is not aged, that means which doesn't matter how old are your parents, you can lodge the 103. Okay. This is another matrix. Why I have divided into these two matrices, this is just to clearly differentiate between the contributory and non-contributory and aged and not aged. Now, this matrix is about which visas do you get the bridging visa. One of the most common questions in our consultations when we do for parent visas is people ask that my parents are already here on tourist visa. Are they going to get the bridging visa? Will they get to stay in Australia while the application is being decided? The meaning of bridging visa is basically it bridges the gap between your current visa and the decision which is being made while in processing till the decision is being made on your visa that you have lodged. So basically bridges the gap so that you can stay lawfully in Australia while you're waiting for the visa decision. The visa subclass that you can see in the purple section is about the 103, 143, 173. You don't get a bridging visa. So for example, if your parents are here in Australia on a tourist visa and they don't have a no further stay condition, they get to stay in Australia if they lodge an onshore visa. 103, 143, this is what will my parents will be able to stay. I'm like, no, because these visas, if you lodge onshore, that is in Australia, you don't get to have a bridging visa. So that means you have to depart when your tourist visa is expiring. Bridging visa will be granted, if you can see in the blue section, the bridging visa will be granted if you are in Australia, parents are in Australia, and they lodge an onshore, which is the 804, 864, and 884. So these are the three subclasses. You get a bridging visa if you lodge the application in Australia. The processing times vary. I'll be talking about the processing times in the next slide as well, that how long the parent visa takes to be processed. It varies a lot depending on which visa subclass you have lodged, whether you have lodged a contributory or whether you have lodged a non-contributory visa. It depends. The processing time depends on the subclass that you lodge. It could be 2 to 3 years. If it's a contributory one, if it's a non-contributory, it could take as long as 30 years. It keeps fluctuating. The processing times keeps fluctuating. And now, when I talk about the processing times, the people think that why my visa is taking so long? Why is it taking 20 to 30 years? Now, what the department has done is they have released queue dates. What queue date means is that when your application will be started to be ready to be processed. So that means, for example, one of the most common question is that my queue date has been assigned. So queue date doesn't mean the application is just processed straight away. Queue date means that your application will start. For example, the processing time is 20 years, let's say. So your 20 years will start from that date from the application is being queued. So that's basically what means about the queue date. As of 30th April 2022, the department has released the contributory parent visa applications with the queue date of July 2016. So that means the applications that they received from July 2016, the processing time will start from there, from July 2016. From normal parent visa applications, which are non-contributory, there's a queue date up to October 2010. As I said, it takes a very long time for these applications to be processed. The aged parent visa with the queue date up to December 2012. This is just a small chart. Now, this data has come from the Department of Home Affairs. So it's an accurate data with the queue release dates. Okay. Now, another question, processing times and why do they change? As everybody knows, most visas, whether it's tourist visa or skilled visa or any visa, basically the processing times are not fixed. And specifically for the parent visa, they keep changing the processing times because, and they don't usually provide the processing times for contributory and the aged parent visas because it is subject to capping and queuing. That's the reason. Now, the capping and queuing changes because it depends on how many applications were refused, how many applications have been withdrawn by the people, and how many applications have been remitted back to the Department of Home Affairs. So, because the number of applications, the data keeps changing, and accordingly, the processing times keeps changing as well. Okay. Now, I'm going to be talking about the eligibility of parent visa that if, for example, you have a question, you are here in Australia and you say that my parents are overseas and they are, let's say, 60 or 65 years old and they want to migrate to Australia. So the basic eligibility of you being a sponsor, so let's say Mr. A is a permanent resident or a citizen. So the basic criteria is that you must be a resident or a citizen here to sponsor your parent. So for example, if your parent, your mother is an applicant, your mother should have a child who is an Australian citizen or permanent resident or an eligible New Zealand citizen. Everybody is aware of the citizen and resident criteria. However, the eligible New Zealand citizen is also, if you're an eligible New Zealand citizen, which I'll talk about who are eligible New Zealand citizen, then you are eligible to sponsor your parent. Your child has been living in Australia lawfully for at least 2 years before you lodge your application. So let's say that if you are a permanent resident and you were here for just a day and you decide to go back and live in your home country where you belong or where you were born, um, and you never came to Australia, you have never worked in Australia, you have never lived in Australia, you may not be eligible to sponsor your parents. So you should be living here, you should be usually a resident here, working here, and then you can sponsor your parents. Now, you definitely need to have a sponsor. Without a sponsor, parents cannot migrate here on a permanent residency or temporary residency. Um, Next thing is you beat the balance of family test. So very, very important eligibility. What balance of family test means that 50% of the children must be a resident or a citizen. So when I say 50%, that means if there are 4 kids, for example, if my mom has 3 children and one of me is I'm a resident or a citizen here, but I've got 2 other siblings who are not a resident or citizen in Australia, then my parents cannot migrate permanently to Australia because we do not meet the balance of family test. So that means less than 50% of the children are permanent resident or citizens. So another example of balance of family test is, let's say, if there are 4 kids of parents and 2 of them are resident or citizen in Australia, 2 of them are overseas, then they meet the balance of family test because 50% of the children are in Australia. So that's very important criteria. Otherwise, application has very high chances of refusal. You must meet health and character requirements. That's another most important criteria. You should be not have any convictions or the police check should come out to be clear. There are some things that can be addressed if you have health or character requirements. You can contact us and we can take care of that as well. Now, my next slide is about the same, the core criteria for the grant of a permanent parent visa that include, like I mentioned, the balance of family test. If you're applying for an onshore parent visa, you should be old enough to receive the age pension in Australia. Now, remember we spoke about in my previous slides about the aged parent visa. I'll be discussing about the age pension, that what is the age pension requirement in Australia. So if you meet that age requirement, then you can apply for the permanent visa. Meet health and character requirements. And there is also a bond, which is a refundable bond, which is also called the assurance of support that I'll be discussing in my next slides as well. Now, there are also parent visas that includes 2 stages. So for example, you may not be eligible to apply for direct permanent residency, but you can split that parent visa into 2 stages, the temporary and permanent visa. But the temporary visa may lead to a permanent residency, which I'll discuss about that as well. Processing times can vary. So these are the core criteria of parent visas. Now, when we spoke about the balance of family test, so which visas they are applicable to is very important. The 103 parent visa, 143, 173, 804, 864, and 884. These are the visas that you must be eligible and you should meet the balance of family test. Balance of family test, as I explained, 50% of the children must be resident or citizen. Now, when we talk about if the parents say, okay, my child is not eligible or you should have an ineligible child. So what is the definition of eligible or ineligible child? The child is eligible child to sponsor their parents if you are a citizen or a permanent resident, usually residing. So see how I've mentioned that you should be usually residing in Australia. So if you have not residing in Australia and if you've stayed overseas, you have not made an entry to Australia, then you may not be an eligible sponsor. And what if it is an ineligible child is taken to be resident overseas? If you're residing overseas, you're not eligible. The department doesn't consider children who are in Australia on a temporary visa as usually resident in Australia. The definition may vary. That is why they don't have like a fixed definition of a usually resident. It can vary as per your situations and circumstances. The child is lost, if the child's whereabouts are not known, they do not consider that as an eligible child. So for example, if a child has disappeared or your child is not contactable, if you have a son who is an Australian citizen and you're not able to contact, then you may not be eligible and the sponsor may not be eligible to sponsor you. Okay. Again, like we discussed, the balance of family test. So these are some of the criteria. Stepchild, what is the definition? Partner, current partner's child, or your former partner's child. So balance of family test is not counted. The balance of family test is only counted for your own parents, not the stepchildren or your step cousins. It's not counted. Okay. Now, very important information to consider about the parent visas. These are most common questions that we get in our consultations from the clients, that the parent visas are permanent visas available to applicants who are parents of a child who is a settled Australian citizen. So see how I keep using the word settled Australian citizen, permanent resident, or eligible New Zealand citizen. They must satisfy the Schedule 1, Schedule 2 criteria, the balance of family test, the age requirements. There is no exemption for not meeting a balance of family test. So if you do not meet the balance of family test, then your application ends up in a refusal and there is no exemption for it. These are the basic criteria. If you lodge an aged parent visa and you do not meet the age pension, then a very high chances of refusal and there is no exemption for it. So when you are lodging a parent visa, you need to be very clear that which category you fall into and then apply for the visa accordingly. Now, to apply for onshore parent visa, the main applicant must satisfy the pensionable age. These subclasses 884, 864, and 804 are the aged ones, not the normal ones. They are the aged ones, so you have to meet the age pension requirement. A parent visa can be onshore and apply for an offshore parent visa. Since this COVID started, they basically removed these criteria. So you don't need to be onshore or offshore. You can apply for 173143 onshore as well. You don't need to be outside Australia. But like I mentioned, that you may not get the bridging visa. This basic information, two groups of parent visa, contributory and non-contributory. Now, I get asked that why is it called a contributory visa? Because of the large sum of money that is contributed upon when you lodge the application. I'll be discussing about the fees in my next slide as well. Now, what is an eligible New Zealand citizen? The people who arrived in Australia on a New Zealand passport on 26th Feb 2001 or in Australia for a period of total 12 months in the last 2 years immediately before the 26th Feb 2021. So they are considered eligible New Zealand citizen. If you're not an eligible New Zealand citizen, then you have to be either a permanent resident or a permanent or an Australian citizen to sponsor your parents. Bridging visa, who are eligible, like I've discussed. If you're lodging an aged parent visa, 804, 864, then you get a bridging visa. For example, I'll take examples so it's easier to understand. If your parents are in Australia on a tourist visa and they meet the criteria for aged parent visa, You lodge the 804 and 864, they get to stay in Australia if you have lodged a valid application, meeting all the requirements. If it's a valid application, they get a bridging visa A that they can lawfully continue to stay in Australia while the application is being processed. You also get a bridging visa if you're lodging a contributory aged parent visa, which is a temporary visa. The bridging visa comes into effect when your current visa expires. So, for example, if your tourist visa is expiring on the 1st of September 2022, you've lodged a valid contributory aged parent visa application in Australia. Your bridging visa will kick in the day after your visa expires. So you can stay lawfully in Australia meanwhile. Right. Now, I'm going to be talking about different visa subclasses, that what are they basically, and what do they mean by, what are the eligibility options as well. The 173 is a contributory parent visa. Contributory, like I said, you pay big money to the department. You're making a contribution to the department by paying so much of money. Maybe that's because that you haven't worked here, you haven't paid taxes. The department is taking the whole lump sum money from you. So 173, you need to make sure that the 870 subclass, which is a sponsored parent temporary visa, which the department introduced recently in the last 1 or 2 years, if you hold an 870 visa in Australia, you cannot apply for parent visa. So if you have entered Australia already on an 870 subclass, you are in Australia on 870 subclass, you cannot apply for the 173 or a 143 parent visa. There is no exemption for it. You are straight away not eligible. Now, the word itself, because it says temporary, the question rises that how can you apply for a permanent visa if you're holding a temporary visa? So if you're holding a 173 temporary visa, you can transition into 143. So for example, let's say an example that your mother comes here on a 173 visa. After 2 years, temp of holding the 173 visa, you can apply for a 143, but you have to do it within 2 years of holding the 173 visa. The applicant may be in or outside Australia at the time of application. It doesn't matter. You don't get a bridging visa. Even if you're paying a big amount of money, you don't get a bridging visa because it's not the aged parent visa. Age criteria is not applicable. So any visa subclass that has not got the word aged, the criteria of being 65 or 67, whatever is the pension age requirement, you do not need to meet that age criteria. So if your parents are even 45 years or 50 years, they can lodge the application. The processing time is around 2 to 3 years, so it's not that long. It's probably you're paying a lot of money to the Department of Home Affairs, so the processing time is shorter. Now, the 143 contributory parent visa, which is the permanent visa, same criteria applies. If you are holding an 870 parent visa in Australia, you cannot apply for 143 contributory parent visa. This provision they made, I know it's a little bit of, sometimes people say, look, it's not fair. I mean, because of the fact there could be one reason they haven't mentioned why they don't allow, but I assume with my experience that because the 870 visa, I'll explain about the requirements of 870 because it's for 5 to 10 years. That is why they introduced this visa. So if you're holding an 870 in Australia, you cannot apply. So you can apply for the parent visa first from outside, and then you can apply for 870. The other way around, it's easier. You can be in or outside Australia on the to be granted a 143, doesn't matter. If you are in Australia on a tourist visa, for example, and if you had a visa refusal in the past, check if you are Section 48 barred or not, because some visas you may not be able to apply if you have visa refused or cancelled and you're in Australia and you're Section 48 barred. Age criteria is not applicable because, like I mentioned, the visa subclass does not have the word aged. So age criteria is not applicable. Doesn't matter how old are your parents. You can directly apply for the parent visa. All right, now I'm going to be talking about the 103 parent visa. We spoke about 173 and 143. 173 is a temporary, 143 is a permanent visa. 103 is again a permanent visa subclass that you can lodge in or outside Australia. There is no age criteria. The processing time is really long because of the fact, see how the subclass does not have the word contributory. So when the contributory is not there, that means that it has got a very long processing time, um, 25 to 30 years, depending on the queue dates and the allocations, the quota the Department of Home Affairs have. It could vary between 35 to 40 years. The medicals and the characters are very important to be met. So that is also one of the requirements for like other parent visas. The 884, which is the contributory aged parent visa, it's a temporary visa. So the aged visa have got two different categories. One is a temporary and one is a permanent. Contributory parent visa, that you're giving money to the department and it's got less processing time. So you can live in Australia. It gives you a bridging visa. You can continue to stay in Australia while the visa is being processed. It also lets you apply for the contributory aged parent visa, which is the subclass 864. So you're going from a temporary to a permanent visa. You do have an option to apply directly for the permanent visa as well. So 864. The only difference is in the cost, the money that you're paying to the department, the fees that you're paying to the department. The 864 contributory parent visa is a permanent visa. The applicant must be in Australia and must be aged according to the pension age requirement and under the Australian Social Security law. The contributory parent visa, it allows you to get a bridging visa if you have lodged a valid application onshore. The members of the family unit who are making the combined application with the primary applicant will be granted the visa provided the main applicant and secondary applicant meets all the relevant criteria. Onshore applicants, like I said, do check if there's a Section 48 bar or not on your visa and whether you have a no further stay condition on your visa or not. The no further stay condition, it may be attached to your tourist visa. So if you have a no further stay condition attached to your tourist visa, you may not be able to apply for an onshore. You may have to ask for a waiver to the department that, look, my parents cannot depart due to these compelling and compassionate reasons, and this is the reason we want to have this waived, this condition waived, and then you may be able to apply for the onshore parent visa. Now the 804, so we discussed the 6 subclasses. So one of the subclasses 804, which is the aged parent visa. So we have two, contributory and non-contributory. Before, like we discussed, the temporary and permanent. Now this is the direct permanent visa. The processing time is really long. The word contributory is not there. That means that you are not paying the big amount, the fees to the department, and hence the processing time is really long. But the good thing is that you are on a bridging visa. So if your parent is here and they are aged as per the pension and the retirement age, which is on the government website, the dss.gov.au. You can go to the website and also check whether your parents are eligible for the age pension or not. So if you apply for that visa, the subclass 804, the aged parent visa, you get the associated bridging visa. That means your parents can continue to stay in Australia while the processing of the application. So it's 30 to 35 years, your parents continue to stay here. However, do keep in mind that what is the age of your parents. Some like for example, clients, the parents are 70 years old and the processing time is 25 to 30 years old. So they may not get the visa while they're 95 or 100 years old. The cost of health insurance must be considered. For the Medicare, you need to contact the Medicare department usually for whether they are eligible for the Medicare benefits or not. The police checks and medicals, the character test has to be met. Usually for the police checks in any country where you have lived for more than 12 months in the last 10 years, you will be requested the police check. Now we spoke about the age pension. Now age pension is, you need to check the age requirement. So like we discussed, the aged parent visa. So this is a chart. It is from the department website, the dss.gov.au. It shows the years, the pension age. So the applicants, your parents, must meet the pension age if they want to apply for the aged parent visa, because aged parent visa gets you the associated bridging visa. To qualify for the age pension, you must be an Australian resident and in Australia on the day the claim is logged. So there are certain requirements, the residence requirements, to claim that you are in the age group of that the pension age, and hence you will be eligible. So this is the residence requirement. This is basically I've just put that how and why do they consider this age as the pension age. However, this is not relevant to the application, but to understand that why this age is called the pension age. Now, it is not an online application, how and where to lodge. It is a paper application. You have to post a valid application to the Parent Visa Processing Centre in Northbridge, Western Australia. Or you can courier the application to the Parent Centre Department of Home Affairs in the Wellington Street in West Perth in the postcode 6005. That's the address where you have to lodge a paper application and a valid application. If your application is not valid, you will not be provided the associated bridging visa. In order to get a bridging visa, as a matter of fact, for any application, the application must have been lodged validly. What validly means that when you talk about a valid application, it means that it should have met the Schedule 1. Schedule 1 means at the time of application criteria, every application, every visa, not only parent visa, have a Schedule 1 criteria. That means you must lodge a valid application. Now the capping is about the queuing, like we discussed about the processing times, that how long does it take for the parent visa to be processed. Now the big difference between the all the parent visas is the categories is about the processing times and the fees. That's the main difference, the processing time, fees, and the bridging visas. Now, like we said, the capping, I've already discussed the queue, that what is the queue date for which visa, and according to that, the visas will be processed. When the number of cap is reached, for example, a department has a particular limit of capping, and when that capping reaches, they do not process any further parent visas, and it is queued and allocated a place once it becomes available. Why the processing time change? Change in planning levels, how many visa applications are submitted depends on how many applications have been withdrawn or refused, how many applications have been remitted to the department, and how many have been approved. So that's the reason why it keeps changing. Now, assurance of support is mandatory, and it is an agreement to financially assist your family member, your parents, if necessary, that to ensure that cost of the Australian taxpayer is minimized. So you need to understand this assurance of support is basically the department needs to see whether you will be able to support. You are agreeing to repay the security payments claimed by the visa applicant. So these are the payments that are included. Basically, that is the reason behind why they want an assurance of support from the applicant sponsor. The types of assurance support and which visas need to have an assurance of support. The parent visas can have a lot of requirements attached to it. Like I said, balance of family test, which fees you need to pay to the department, which visas are going to get the bridging visa, which visas include the assurance of support. So you need to be careful while you're lodging a paper application because there's a lot of hard work required to prepare the application. Now, 103 aged parent visa, basically all of them age dependent, remaining relative visa, they all need mandatory assurance of support. Now, these are the below visas which says discretionary assurance of support, which means that it's at the discretion of the Department of Home Affairs. What it means is once you have lodged a valid application for these 4 visas, the case officer will assess the application, and now it will be at the discretion of the case officer that whether they want you to provide an assurance of support or not. Some details about the income assurance of support, that the taxable income, how much should be the income. The notice of assessment is the document that you need to prove the assurance of support. Okay. Okay, to check your eligibility, that someone comes and says to me, oh, I'm not working, can I provide an assurance of support to my mother for parent visa? So the answer is no. You have to provide an Australian the tax notice of assessment to be an assurer. um, okay, so the thing is, even if you are not eligible, your partner can show the assurance of support. So if the husband is not working and the wife is working, or vice versa, one of them can be an assurance of support. You can also combine the two income of you and your wife or your husband to become an assurer. Okay, settled sponsor. Very hidden thing, and a very important word in the parent visa is that you as a sponsor should be a settled Australian resident and citizen. Now, what does that word mean? For example, we spoke about usually residing in Australia. So, but at the same time, you also need to be a settled sponsor. For these visas, you need to be a settled sponsor. 103-114, 143-173, 804, 864, and 884. What is a settled sponsor? That you should be lawfully residing in Australia. Now, different definitions there are for the lawful resident. If you have any confusions, please feel free to ask questions. If I'm not able to cover the questions, please feel free to contact us. We leave the link in the chat group, and then you can contact us for your parent visa questions. Okay, the fees. Now, this is a very important chart. I'm going to be spend some time on this, the fees that you need to pay to the department. There are different fee structure for the parent visas, for contributory and non-contributory parent visa, and the aged parent visa as well, and the normal parent visa. So different fee structures. When we talk about the 143, which is the permanent contributory parent visa, a base application fees. Now, when I talk about the base application fees, which means that you have to pay that at the time of application. When the application is lodged, at that time, if you're doing a paper application, because the parent visa is a paper application, at the time when you're lodging the application, you need to pay the basic fees, which is the 4335, which is for the main applicant. The main applicant will be your mother, for example, and an additional applicant will be the father, as an example. So if you are lodging a 143 paper application, you pay the $4,355 plus the 1465, or if you have children, please make sure that the child is eligible to lodge as a dependent, in case you're adding the child. The $46,000, it is like we discussed, the contributory parent visa, the contribution. So you have to pay a lump sum amount if you are asking for permanent residency for a 143 visa. Now, this 46,300 you do not need at the time of application. When you lodge the application with the basic fees, 4,355, plus the for the secondary applicants, when the application is about to be finalized, the Department of Home Affairs will send you an invoice for 46,300. This may change next year because every financial year, the Department of Home Affairs increases the fees for different visa subclasses. So you pay a lump sum of 46,300. The 173 visa, which is the temporary contributory parent visa, you pay 2,935 as the base application fees, which means at the time of application, when you are lodging the paper application, you pay this fees and the additional applicant fees if you have dependents on your application. Now, this fees, you will notice that as compared to 46,300, this fees 29,130 is lesser than this one because of the fact that this is a contributory parent visa, but it is a temporary visa. Because it's a temporary visa, what the department has done is you pay 29,130 in the beginning, and the rest when you apply for the contributory 143 visa. So the 173 visa leads to 143 visa. The temporary contributory visa 173 leads to 143 permanent visa. When you are doing the 143, because you've already paid this lump sum amount to the Department of Home Affairs only charges $385 as the base application fees. And this 19,000 is payable upon the visa being finalized. So what they have done is the department has split this $46,300 cost into two installments. One you pay at the time of lodging the 173, and the rest you pay 19,420 when the application is being finalized. The contributory aged parent visa 864, the basic application fees is 4,355 and plus the dependent fees, and then you pay 43,600 upon the application being finalized. Now this is per applicant, so if your mother and father both are lodging the application, you pay $43,600 each for each parent. The temporary contributory aged parent visa has got a different fee structure. So main application fees 4,355, and you pay the additional fees plus 29,130 per applicant about the visa being finalized. So because it's a temporary contributory aged parent visa, you can see the fees is half of the lump sum amount, which is 43,600. The aged parent visa 804 and the 103 parent visa have got this fee structure of 4,560. You can see that there is no lump sum amount of 43,600 because this is not a contributory parent visa, which means that this visa is going to take 25 to 30 years for processing. So they are not taking the big lump sum from you. There are other expenses involved, medical examinations, maybe $300 to $400, and police checks depending on the country of passport. The Australian federal police checks also cost around $45, and then you pay for the overseas police check as well. That's additional cost. Okay, so I've covered the contributory and non-contributory parent visas, and now I'm going to be talking about the subclass 870. Now, this visa subclass was introduced by the Department of Home Affairs to assist or maybe in favor of the people who do not meet the balance of family test. So remember how we discussed the balance of family test has to be met for a valid application. So if you are five siblings and only one is in Australia for the resident or a citizen or an eligible New Zealand resident, you can still sponsor your parent for 870. But this is not a permanent visa. This is a temporary visa. The word itself says sponsored parent temporary visa. Okay, so it's an online application. As compared to the previous ones, they are paper applications, but this is an online application. The 870 subclass opened on 17th April 2019, that pretty recently got introduced. And the sponsorship application must be approved before the parents can apply as to be sponsored. So unlike the parent visas, you can straight away lodge the paper application. You do not need a sponsorship approval in order to apply for a parent visa. But in the case of 870, you first need to be approved as a sponsor. So your child, who is a resident or a citizen, needs to be approved as a sponsor. Once the sponsorship is approved, then you apply for the 870 application. Without sponsorship approval, you cannot apply for 870. Now, this temporary parent visa, it's basically, like I said, the department introduced so that the parents can be reunited with their children for 5 years or 10 years, depending on the fees you pay to the department. The eligibility of the sponsor should be that you must be an Australian citizen or permanent resident or eligible New Zealand citizen. This visa allows parents to stay in Australia for up to 5 years at a time and maximum of 10 years. So if you have stayed in Australia on 870 for 10 years, you cannot apply for further extension. The 870 does not replace the existing parent visa category. Okay. Now, like we discussed, the balance of family test for all parent visas, the balance of family test have to be met. However, the 870 visa, which is a temporary sponsored visa, the family test does not apply to this visa. To be granted a the temporary sponsored visa, a person must satisfy these number of requirements, including they should have an Australian child approved as a sponsor. the sponsor also needs to meet the identity, health, and character requirements. So the sponsor also needs to provide a police check. If you do not clear the character requirements, they may not approve the sponsorship. You should not have an outstanding public health debt in Australia. So if you have any money owing to the government, or if you have a debt, then you may not be approved unless you clear the debt. Usually what happens is when you apply for the parent sponsorship to be the sponsor to be approved, and if you have a debt, the department may send you a letter that you need to clear this much amount of money and you owe this much amount of debt to the government. You may need to clear that amount, pay the invoice, then you send the invoice and the receipt of the payment to the Department of Home Affairs, and then they approve their sponsorship, and then you apply for the visa. You also need to have health insurance from an Australian provider for the whole period of stay that you will be staying in Australia. The visa application charge, if you're applying for a 5 years visa, so if you want your parents to stay here for 5 years, you will be charged a $10,000 one-time payment. And if you apply for a 3 years visa, you will be charged $5,000. That's the department fees. Now, what are the key features of the 5-year sponsored parent visa? So they have a limited of 15,000 visas per year, a maximum of 10 years of cumulative stay permitted. So which means that once you have been granted the 870, parents can depart and come. You are allowed multiple entries. It is not a single entry, because like some of the tourist visas have multiple travel and single entry. So 870, if you have been granted, you can just up and down, travel up and down. There is no limit to it. You are free to enter and exit Australia. If you are, however, you need to make sure that if you're lodging a second application, you must leave Australia for 90 consecutive days before making the second temporary sponsored visa. However, there have been cases where the department has waived this condition, so you need to ask for permission from the department. This is a no work visa. You cannot work on this visa 870 because it is at the end of the day a tourist visa for parents, which is a long-term tourist visa. Because it's a tourist visa, you will have a condition of 8103, which means that you will not be allowed to work in Australia. Now, sponsorship requirement, you should be above 18. If you're under 18, if you're minor, you cannot apply for sponsorship. You have to meet an income requirement, must be approved before 870 can be lodged. When you're applying for sponsorship, the sponsorship fee will be 820. You need to provide an Australian Federal Police check. So that means the department is sure that you meet the character requirements. Now, when we talk about the taxable income, the sponsor must have an income of 83,454.80. If you do not have this taxable income, you may have a refusal on the sponsorship. So the sponsorship must be approved before you lodge the 870 visa. You can also combine. So if your own income is not $83,000 in that particular amount, if your salary taxable income is only 60 to 65,000, you can combine your partner's income to show to the department that we have this taxable income to be approved as a sponsor. Obligations, as a sponsor, you do have obligations that your sponsor, your parents, you need to make sure that they do not breach the visa conditions. If you have not been charged or convicted for an offense, so you make sure that because you are the sponsor, that your application can be jeopardized if there is a conviction or any offense to or a debt. If the debt is also not cleared, then it can jeopardize the application. If you want to make changes to the sponsorship, it can cover up to only 2 parents per household at the time of the application. So these are some of the sponsorship requirements. I'll see if I've got any questions, and if not, please feel free to leave the questions after the session as well. Okay. Now, if you want to make changes to the sponsorship, your client, if your client is already a sponsor for 2 parents, if they wish to replace a parent, they can. If they need to withdraw in sponsorship for another parent first, they can do that as well. So that is allowed if you want to make changes to the sponsorship. Now, the documents required, I've listed some of the main documents that you need to provide as a sponsor. You need to provide, because you need to be a resident or a citizen. So definitely you need to provide an Australian citizenship passport or your birth certificate, or a proof of permanent residency, could be your visa grant letter or a stamp on your passport. But you need to provide evidence of residency or citizenship. If you're an eligible New Zealand citizen, you need to provide proof of that as well. Your passport as an identity document, birth certificate, marriage certificate is important, because if you are showing a taxable income of your partner, then you have to show marriage certificate as a proof of relationship. Adoption papers is relevant if you're an adopted child of your parent. The 8-year notice of tax assessment is very important because of the salary requirements. So you must show the notice of assessment in order to show that you meet the income test required by the department. Australian and overseas police check is mandatory to see whether you cleared the character requirements. Okay, the forms 956, if you're hiring a migration agent, it is an online application, so you don't need to fill up the paper. The form 80, which is the character assessment for applicant, that is mandatory. This is for the main applicant. Passport photo, passport copy, birth certificate. Birth certificate is very important to show your relationship with the sponsor. Marriage certificate and the evidence of relationship to your sponsor, and health insurance. Health insurance is mandatory. Okay, guys, so I'll see if I've got any questions, but feel free to leave a review of my presentation. This presentation was about parent visa, contributory, non-contributory, and aged parent visa. I hope this presentation helped you in understanding what are the requirements, what is the fee structure for the parent visas, and which visas end up in a bridging visa. I've got a question here. Urvish has asked that I and my wife are PR of Australia. I want to bring my father and mother, both age above 60, to Australia permanently. So thanks, Urvish, for your question. In case if your parents meet the pension age, then you can apply for aged parent visa. You can either apply for an onshore or offshore visa. If they come onshore on a tourist visa, and if they do not have a no further stay condition, you may be eligible to apply for onshore. However, with the 60 years, you may not fit into the pension category stage. We can check that in the consultation. If you are not eligible for the aged parent visa, you can apply for the 143 or the 173, which is the contributory parent visa, where you have to pay the lump sum amount. Waiting time, if you're applying for the contributory parent visa, which is where you pay the lump sum amount, the processing time could be 2 to 3 years. I haven't experienced more than that, so approximately 2 to 3 years. However, Urvish, please make note that you need to meet the balance of family test. So if you are, that is 50% of their children should be resident or citizen. So if you are sponsoring your father and mother, if you have two brothers or sisters, for example, and if you're the only child, then you may not meet the balance of family test. Shaz is asking, what's the best parent visa for PR for less waiting time? So less waiting time, Shaz, is the contributory parent visa. You are paying the 43,600 to the department, and then the processing time is 2 to 3 years. So I hope that answers your question. But you need to check the eligibility. You can contact us for consultation, or you can contact me, and we can have a chat about it. Situation of a widow, Feza is asking, 60 years old, meeting currently onshore on a visitor visa. That's great. So 60-year-old, if she does not meet the pension, so you may be eligible, she may be eligible to apply for the onshore parent visa, which is the 173 or 143. Like I said, the difference is in the payment of fees, but it will not give you a bridging visa. We can have a chat about it, because she is eligible to apply for an onshore parent visa if you meet the balance of family test. I may have to end this session now, and thank you so much everyone for listening to this session. I hope it's helped. And if you have any questions in relation to bringing in your parents for your parent visa or tourist visa or any related visa questions, please feel free to contact Aussizz Group. Thank you, everyone.